Hi, I'm Kathleen Bayless, a Girl Experience Specialist from Girl Scouts of Northern Illinois. You're here for Votes for Women, a program all about the 19th Amendment. I'm glad you're here.
We're going to start with a quiz. Could women vote in the United States before the 19th Amendment was passed? Yes or no? Both are kind of true. Women could not vote everywhere in the United States before the 19th Amendment was passed, but some states did allow women to vote in elections before the 19th Amendment. What does suffrage mean? To endure pain, the right to vote, to inflict pain on someone else, or none of the above. This is kind of a confusing word because suffer is part of it, so you might think it has to do with pain, but suffrage is the right to vote.
Let's go over some definitions. Vote is a formal expression of opinion or will, often by ballot in an election. You probably vote in your classroom or in your Girl Scout troop. Suffrage is the right of voting. Suffragist is the person who supports extending voting rights, especially to women, and this was the word used in the United States. Suffragette was a word used in England, but it means the same thing as suffragist. Sometimes the word suffragette was used to make fun of the suffragists in the United States. A law. A law is a collection of rules for a community. Constitution is the basic beliefs and laws of a nation, state, or social group that established the powers and duties of the government and guaranteed certain rights for the people in it.
We are now traveling back in time 100 years to June 13th, 1920, to a meeting of suffragists working to pass the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution.
Hello, thank you for joining me in my house today. I'm so glad you're here as we're here to work on passing the 19th Amendment so that women in every state will have the right to vote. It's such an important issue, and I'm so glad you're ready to work on helping us get the amendment the rest of the way. As you know, since March, we've only needed one state to pass the amendment. And I know we can do it. It's really important. I know we were all disappointed when just a week ago on June 2nd, Delaware rejected the amendment. But I think we have a chance. We're going to focus our efforts on Tennessee. Now, Tennessee, the governor's been on the fence about whether to hold a special session or not, but I think he'll be convinced to hold that special session. And we really want to help convince all the legislators in Tennessee that they should vote for the amendment. I think there's a chance. As you know, last spring, Tennessee gave women the right to vote in some local elections, just not state and national elections. So they're somewhat supportive of women's right to vote. So there's a chance. But it's really important that we pass this amendment real soon. We would love to have it passed before September. As you know, 1920 is an election year, and it's really important that as many women as possible are able, have the right to vote in the election in November. So we need to pass the amendment before September so that they have time to register and to vote and are able to vote. So today we will talk about what the past is and what led us to this moment in time. You'll give us your ideas on how you want to help pass the amendment and what you're willing to do for the cause. We'll talk about the near future and how we'll focus our energies on Tennessee. We'll imagine the future and what it might be like in 100 years to celebrate the anniversary of the 19th Amendment, where our daughters and granddaughters and great-granddaughters and great-great-granddaughters and so on will be able to vote. It's so important. So grab a cup of tea or another refreshment and let's get started.
As we get started, I want to know what you will do to help support the movement for women's right to vote. Will you create signs and stand in front of the White House? Will you join the women's suffrage parade? Will you write letters to politicians to let them know what you think? Will you donate money to support the cause? Will you talk to your friends and family about why they should support the cause? Will you visit the office of a politician to discuss the matter? Will you wear a button to let others know what you support? Will you give speeches at meetings and in the parks to get more people to support our cause? Will you write stories, write songs, create artwork or cartoons to support the cause? Or will you write letters to the editors and articles for magazines and newspapers? So let us know what you're planning to do, but maybe you're not ready right now. Will you let me know why you aren't helping right now? Is it because you are interested but you're not ready to help right now? You don't have the time to help? Or maybe you don't feel women have the right to vote. Please let me know. Wearing buttons is one way you can support the cause, show what you care about, and draw attention to it. The women's suffrage movement uses the colors gold and white and sometimes purple. You can see this button here is a simple Votes for Women. This button here has a woman with a trumpet. Some words that are hard to read, but it mentions the National Women's Congress or National Women's Union. This button is a special button used from 1919 to 1920. Has a giant 36 because there are 36 states needed to ratify the amendment. So getting to that 36 number is really important. Now we're going to go over a bit of history. In 1776, Abigail Adams wrote to her husband to remember the ladies as he and others were writing the Declaration of Independence to declare the United States free of England. Here's a painting of Abigail Adams. In 1776 to 1810, New Jersey wrote it into their state constitution that women had the right to vote. Later, they took that right away. In 1848, the first Women's Rights Convention was held in Seneca Falls, New York. They created the Declaration of Sentiments and Resolution. A few people who were there were Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Frederick Douglass. So yes, there were both men and women at this Women's Rights Convention. In 1861 to 1865 is when the U.S. Civil War happened. In 1868, the 14th Amendment was ratified, and it defined a citizen and voter as male. This frustrated many people who wanted votes for women. In 1872, Susan B. Anthony was arrested and brought to trial for attempting to vote in a presidential election. And she said, "Is it a crime for a U.S. citizen to vote?" You can find the transcripts to this trial to this day. The judge, unfairly, had made up his mind before hearing all the arguments. As Girl Scouts, do you know what happened in 1912? In 1912, the Girl Scouts of the United States started. In 1913, the National Suffrage Parade took place in Washington, D.C. The National Suffrage Parade took place on March 3, 1913, the day before President Woodrow Wilson's first inaugural, so the day before his parade as well. The parade was well organized and had a program that was like 20 pages long. Women and men marched in the parade and did wear sashes and held banners. The parade, some of the spectators got a little unruly, started to crowd out the parade route and made it hard for the women marching in the parade. Some of the men spat on the women and also hit them. Some people were injured. 1914 to 1918 is when World War I happened. The United States entered the war in 1917. In 1916, Jeannette Rankin was elected to the House of Representatives from the state of Montana, and she became the first woman to serve in Congress. Here's a painting of her. And she said, "I want to be remembered as the only woman who ever voted to give women the right to vote." In 1919, the 19th Amendment passed the House of Representatives and the Senate, and then goes on to the states for ratification. 36 states are needed to make the amendment part of the Constitution. This is a map from March of 1919 that shows women's right to vote in each state. So the states in white, women have the right to vote. And it also includes the year. So Wyoming gave women the right to vote in 1869. The states in black, women have no right to vote. The states with dots and X's have some right to vote. So in Illinois in 1913, women have presidential and municipal suffrage, or they can vote in presidential and city elections. Using banners is one way you can show others what your cause is. This sign here says, "Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty?" These women are known as the Silent Sentinels. They stood in front of the White House with their banners and didn't speak. They just stood with their banners. Did you know this group of women were the first group to ever protest in front of the White House? No group had ever protested in front of the White House before that moment. This is a piece of one of the banners. Creating artwork is another way you can show your support for your cause. These cartoons were created by Nina Allender and appeared in the Suffragists magazine. So here you can see a little girl representing voting rights running towards, this is supposed to be Jeannette Rankin. So Jeannette is going to bring voting rights to everyone. And here we have the Statue of Liberty holding up a Liberty for Women torch. Down here that's cut off a little bit is President Woodrow Wilson. So the Statue of Liberty is asking for voting rights for women. There was a group who did not want women to have the right to vote. This group included both men and women. They also had signs, postcards, songs, and colors. They used the color red. This postcard says, "I want to vote, but my wife won't let me." And it depicts a man having to do the laundry and take care of the child. For some reason, a lot of their postcards and cartoons showed this. They seem to be afraid that if women got the right to vote, women would no longer help with laundry and childcare, and that men would be stuck having to do it all. Amending the Constitution of the United States. The most common way to amend the Constitution is for a proposed amendment to get 2/3 majority vote in both the House of Representatives and the Senate. Then it must have 3/4 of the states vote and pass it or ratify it for it to become law. In 1920, 36 states were needed to ratify the amendment for it to become law. In 2020, since there are 50 states, 38 states are needed to ratify an amendment to make it part of the Constitution. Do you know when your state passed the 19th Amendment? This website is from the National Park Service. It's a story map, women's suffrage, and the ratification of the 19th Amendment. So on it, you can find when each state ratified the amendment and one place of suffrage significance in that state. And you will find out that Wisconsin, Illinois, and Michigan all passed the amendment on June 10th, 1919. So as soon as they could, they had a vote and they passed it. Wisconsin gets the designation of being first to pass the amendment. In August of 1920, lots of people headed to Nashville, Tennessee. People from both sides, people who wanted to pass the amendment and make it happen, and people who wanted to who opposed the amendment and wanted the politicians to vote no against the amendment. And it was really hot that August. But you could tell which side the politicians were on because they wore roses on their jackets. If they wore a red rose, they were opposed to the amendment and they planned to vote no. If they wore a yellow rose, they wanted the amendment and they planned to vote yes to ratify the amendment. There's one story about how one person changed his mind. Harry Bern had planned to vote against the amendment, but he got a letter from his mother, and his mother wanted him to vote for the amendment. So he did change his mind and vote for the amendment. It did end up passing the legislature, and so Tennessee ratified the amendment on August 18th, 1920. After Tennessee had ratified the amendment, making it the 36th state to ratify the amendment, it headed back to Washington, D.C. to officially be certified and become part of the Constitution. The certification took place on August 26, 1920. You will see both dates noted as the date that the amendment became official, August 18th or August 26th. You can celebrate either date or both dates.
Can you imagine what it would be like in 100 years to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment? Wouldn't it be amazing to be around at that time and to be able to remember everything that got us to this moment in time? Oh, it would be so amazing.
The 19th Amendment did give women the right to vote, but states created voter registration laws. So some states, while they were trying to discourage African American men and women from voting, created poll taxes, meaning you had to pay money to vote, and literacy tests that they purposely created to be difficult for African American men and women to prevent them from voting. So in 1964 and 1965, the Voting Rights Act was created by Congress, and it outlaws discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, and it forbids states from imposing discriminatory restrictions on who can vote. In 1971, the 26th Amendment was passed and added to the Constitution, and it grants voting rights to 18-year-olds. Before, you had to be 21 to vote. It took lots of women and men many, many years and lots of hard work to get voting rights passed for women in the United States. Susan B. Anthony died before the 19th Amendment was passed. These are a few women that you should know about. This is Alice Paul. She helped to organize the National Suffrage Parade in 1913. She also organized the Silent Sentinels that stood in front of the White House. She was arrested while doing that for blocking the sidewalk. While in jail, she went on a hunger strike. She ended up being force-fed. When people across the country heard about how the women who were in jail were being mistreated, it brought some of them around to the idea that maybe women should have the right to vote. This is Carrie Chapman Catt. She was working at the same time as Alice Paul, but she didn't think that the protesting that Alice Paul was doing was the way to go. She instead talked to politicians to convince them to change their minds. This is Ida B. Wells. She was a journalist. She wrote lots of stories about how African American men were being mistreated and hurt in the South. You probably heard the word lynchings. She marched in the 1913 suffrage parade. Some people had suggested that she go to the back of the parade instead of marching with Illinois as she wanted to. She decided not to follow that direction. She waited for the parade to start, and then she jumped in and marched with the Illinois delegation. This is Sojourner Truth. She worked to end slavery and also help women get the right to vote. She gave a famous speech titled, "Ain't I a Woman?" There were some in the women's suffrage movement that didn't think as much about helping African American women get the right to vote. In this speech, she reminded the women that she and all African American women were also women and deserved the same rights as the white women. Some people aren't as notable as others, while they all worked hard to fight for the right. Some suffragists might be more famous locally, or maybe even just in your family. This woman right here has important significance to Girl Scouts of Northern Illinois. This is Ruth Hannah McCormick. She helped to get Illinois' suffrage rights passed, and then she helped to pass the 19th Amendment as well. She later became a member of the House of Representatives, so she was elected to office. But she is important to Girl Scouts of Northern Illinois because she donated the land that became Camp Medill McCormick, that she requested be named after her first husband, Medill McCormick. If you want to find out about more suffragists, you can go to the National Park Service website. They have 20 suffragists you should know. They also, at the bottom of the page, have more suffragists to know. So there's more than 20 listed on their page. A great place to learn about some of the people who helped get the 19th Amendment passed. The United States was not the first country to give women the right to vote, nor was it the last. New Zealand was the first and gave women the right to vote in 1893. You might be surprised when some countries gave women the right to vote. The most recent country to give women the right to vote was Saudi Arabia in 2011. Welcome back to 2020. Why is voting important? It helps make sure your opinion is heard or counted. It is one of the many ways you can actively take part in the United States government. It can help make changes in your community, and this includes your town, city, county, state, and country. The people that are elected are representing you. You want to be sure they know what is important to you. How do you want to celebrate the accomplishment of the women's suffrage movement? Will you tell others about the history of the 19th Amendment? Will you tell others about the importance of voting? Will you advocate for a cause you care about? Will you register to vote when you're 18, when you're old enough? Will you learn about those running for office so you can make an informed choice? Or will you run for office yourself someday? Thank you for joining us today. I hope you learned a lot about the 19th Amendment and the men and women who helped make it possible that women across the United States have the right
to vote. I hope that when you're 18 that you register to vote, and I hope you encourage everyone you know to participate and vote themselves. It's really important. Thanks. Bye.
Be sure to look for additional resources about Votes for Women at www.girlscoutsni.org.